Temperatures will start to rise from the west, highs around 12 degrees in the Scilly Isles, but still feeling very chilly in the east, particularly on the coast. Then Thursday, that rain pushes further east, bringing some weather warnings with it across western areas of the UK, as well as parts of the northeast of Scotland. And that rain will continue to stick with us through the end of the week and into the start of the weekend. But temperatures do finally start to rise. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, we'll have the very latest on that horrendous stabbing in Wales earlier this morning. Also as well, lots for us to debate. Should the taxpayer, you and I, be paying even more money for Prince Harry's personal security? Does he warrant that, do you think, or not? And have you seen that the junior doctors will be striking again? Do you still back them? Are you still with them? Would there be a line? If so, what would that be? And get this, everybody, 1 in 3 military personnel are living in accommodation that is below standard. Why? Why? Do we not value our soldiers in this country? What on earth is going on? Also, I want to ask tonight, why are so many people in this country hooked on prescription drugs, namely things like antidepressants? Are we indeed massively depressed, or do you think we are in danger of over-medicalising emotions? Yes, indeed. We're going to have all of that coming your way over the next hour. But first up, let's cross live to the legend that is Polly Middlehurst for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, let's bring you up to date with events in Aberfan in South Wales, where police are saying a 28-year-old man has been arrested now on suspicion of attempted murder following the stabbing of a 29-year-old woman this morning. A pregnant woman was subjected to a knife attack in broad daylight on the street. Chief Inspector Rob Miles from South Wales Police gave this update earlier.
The man is known to the victim and is currently in police custody. I appreciate there will be a real sense of shock within the local community with the attack having happened in broad daylight. Local schools activated the lockdown protocols to keep people safe. Neighbourhood officers have been in the area to ensure pupils have been able to leave the school safely at the normal time. This was done as a precaution and schools will open tomorrow as normal. This was a targeted attack. The woman remains in hospital with injuries which are not believed to be life-threatening at this time.
Well, in other news today, the Home Secretary says he's uncomfortable with some of the criticism being directed at Rwanda as he unveiled a new asylum treaty there today. It's understood new British laws are to be expedited through Parliament, declaring Rwanda a safe country for the processing of asylum seekers arriving in the UK. James Cleverly praised Rwanda for being part of the British solution.
Rwanda has now established a strong reputation for the humane and professional administration of refugees and migrants. This is something understood by the UK and the multilateral community. The treaty that we signed today builds on that joint work. It takes the positive professional attitude that you and your government display and allies it with the work that the UK is doing to ensure that we break the business model of those evil people smuggling gangs.
James Cleverly, but the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, cast doubt on the plans.
This is now the third Home Secretary to go to Rwanda with a chequebook. They've sent more Home Secretaries than they have asylum seekers to Rwanda, and this scheme is badly failing. They still won't tell us how much it will cost, even though we've already know that we've spent £140 million or more on this scheme. And what they could be doing is putting that money into going after the criminal smuggler gangs and taking action there instead.
Yvette Cooper. Now, junior doctors in England are set to stage the longest strike in NHS history after talks with the government on pay broke down. Ministers and representatives from the British Medical Association, that's the union which represents junior doctors, have been locked in negotiations now for 5 weeks, trying to find a solution. The BMA says the government's offered a pay increase of 3%, which it says amounts to a pay cut for many doctors. The first walkouts are due to start across England from 7 a.m. on the 20th of December. The High Court's been told today that the impact of a successful attack on the Duke of Sussex should have been considered when his security arrangements were changed in 2020. Prince Harry was stripped of special protections normally afforded to royals when he stepped back from his royal duties and moved to the United States. His lawyers say a failure to carry out a full risk analysis meant the prince was treated in an unlawful and unfair way when he was provided with weaker security while visiting the UK. Relatives of victims of the infected blood scandal have delivered a letter to Downing Street today. They're calling for action now from the government after MPs voted last night in favour of speeding up compensation payments. One of the victims of the scandal, Richard Warwick, told GB News earlier about his experience.
This dreadful living with, the three viruses. Luckily, I did manage to clear Hep C in 2015, but I mean, yeah, it's just affected every part of my life. Things like mortgages and insurance. It's just been awful. Of course, losing so many friends and people that you know as well around you.
Richard Warwick. Male to female transgender prisoners who've previously harmed women or girls won't be held in female prisons in Scotland. It's a new policy set out by the Scottish Prison Service. And it says it'll take an individualised approach now to housing transgender people. It means some prisoners will initially be placed in male prisons until more information is known about whether or not they should be housed in accordance with their chosen gender. Scotland's Justice Secretary says the policy supports the rights of transgender people, but also the welfare of prisoners and staff. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I'm Michelle Dewberry. I was listening to that bulletin there. Honestly, sometimes I think of an alien from outer space landed on this planet, in this country. I think they'd think we're stark raving mad when you hear about that last story, when it comes to the whole trans prisoners and, whether or not they should be housed in accordance to their chosen gender. Honestly, this world is going mad. Anyway, there's a lot to unpick tonight before 7 o'clock, and I'm delighted to say alongside me, I've got the Conservative Life here in the House of Lords, Baroness Foster, and the former editor of Labourlist, Peter Edwards. Good evening to both of you. You're very welcome tonight. And you know the drill, don't you? Get in touch with me. What's on your mind tonight? gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get hold of me. Or if Twitter or X or whatever it's called is your thing, you can get in touch there at GB News. Don't forget as well, unless you've been under a rock, you do know that Nigel Farage, soon to be perhaps the king of the jungle. What do you make to that? If you want him to stay in that jungle, scan. You just get your phone out, ladies and gents. If you don't know what I'm talking about, get your phone out, open your camera and take a little picture of that gobbledygook in the corner there, also known as a QR code, and that will give you your votes. It'll tell you what to do. I've got to be honest, I voted for Nigel. It's the first time I've ever voted in a reality TV show in my life. Mainly because I just would absolutely love to see the meltdown that so many people would have if indeed Nigel Farage won. Can you imagine? It'd be absolutely hilarious, wouldn't it? Anyway, look, let me move on swiftly to a very serious matter that many of you would have seen in the news, I'm sure, today. The horrendous situation in Wales of the stabbing of a lady believed to be heavily pregnant. This, of course, in Aberfan down in South Wales. Well, our reporter Jack Carson has just literally been at the press conference there, and we can cross live for the latest. Good evening, Jack. Hope you're not too cold. Bring us up to speed with the latest, please.
Yeah, good evening to you, Michelle. So we've just heard from Chief Inspector Rob Miles from South Wales Police, who confirmed very much what we already knew, but also, of course, some of the witness reports that we'd had from, of course, those local residents surrounding the incident. They confirmed the news from 4:30 today that they had arrested a 28-year-old local man on suspicion of attempted murder. South Wales Police say it is believed that that man is known to the victim, that victim being, as you mentioned, a 29-year-old believed to be heavily pregnant woman, and South Wales Police say that it was a targeted attack, but thankfully the woman who was airlifted and taken, or was not airlifted, but there was an air ambulance to the hospital. They were taken to the University of Cardiff Hospital very, very quickly this morning, just after 9 o'clock. They are not believed to be with any life-threatening injuries, but it was very much a very horrific and violent sounding attack, just from the witness reports that we've had today, with the screaming in the street. One neighbour saying that if it wasn't for that scream, they might not well have realised what was going on and actually gone outside of their house. And the local residents will be very, very thankful that that 28-year-old man arrested on suspicion of attempted murder is in police custody, because, of course, the people that I was speaking to earlier were saying how frightened and petrified they were, not just them, but their children, as well about this man possibly still being on the loose. We know that 6 schools around the Aberfan area were put into lockdown as well, and lockdown procedures. That was on the advice of South Wales Police, of course, who were all throughout the day looking for people. There was armed response police all around Aberfan when I was there earlier, and you could see the heavy patrols of people, of course, looking for this man. Now, police confirmed that he was arrested locally, suggesting that he hadn't been able to get very far, and of course, also the police confirming that schools will then reopen as normal tomorrow. Of course, we hope and pray, of course, the condition of that woman and her baby as well are safe, of course, as they recover from this quite horrific attack.
Thank you very much for that update. I mean, it was just many viewers will be familiar with the awful mining disaster that affected Aberfan. Was it 1966? And over 100 children were killed in that disaster. So when you see the words Aberfan and schools in a kind of sentence construct, which is bad news, it was an awful thing to see today. And I mean, credit where it's due to the police that have found this guy, and also the schools and etc. that acted so quickly to keep all the kids etc. Safe. It's just, in this day and age, these horrendous things seem to go on, don't they? It's awful.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I'm actually old enough to remember Aberfan, and it was probably one of the most tragic things that ever happened on British soil, frankly. And but there seem to be too many. I mean, they're all quite different at times, but there's far too many of these sort of random stabbings and random attacks. They seem to be escalating all over the place. And, you know, more often than not, they go, oh, well, the person that did it, and we don't know in this case, I'm not talking about this case, or, you know, they had some, you know, problems or whatever, but that's not really an excuse. And I just hope that she's fine. I hope the baby is fine.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure everybody will be sending her best wishes. I think the police handled it beautifully. And hopefully all of the residents and the children and parents are all reassured.
Yeah, of course. And like we've just been, Jackie's just been saying there, of course, I would echo that. Of course, I really hope that all of the people involved are OK and will continue to be so. It's very rare, I have to confess, that I talk about Prince Harry not once but twice. If anyone watches my programme regularly, you'll know that I often say it's a H&M zone because I can't bear the absolute ridiculousness that goes on when it comes to this couple very often. But I feel the need to touch upon Harry briefly. I'll get it over the way, out of the way, do it early, as they say, get the hardest things out of the way first, because I really find this topic of this couple and all the rest of it a little bit tedious, I must confess. But anyway, Prince Harry is in court challenging the Home Office over its decision to downgrade his royal security when he visits our country. So you, the taxpayer, me and you, do you think we should be funding Prince Harry's protection? He makes an awful lot of money, doesn't he? I dread to think how much. Off all of his endeavours. Shouldn't he fund his own or not? Jacqueline, where are you?
Very disappointed, because I think we were great fans of Harry. I think everybody, the public, was behind him. They hoped that, you know, he was great fun. He served in the armed forces. And when he got married, I think, you know, the support for him there was brilliant. They made a decision. They made a decision that they would like to step back from royal duties, from the royal family. And with that brings consequences. I think we're more disappointed by what's happened with the books and the various comments that have come out that have been really made the King and others subject to terrible criticisms that, in my view, are totally unjustified. And but when it comes to protection, it's a tricky one, because obviously if you have been born into that family, we know that people can be a target. But by the same token, they're earning plenty of money. They're living a very good life in California. And I think, therefore, that they should be paying towards the protection when they come over.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, though, there was a legal bid. He wanted, apparently, to be able to pay, basically, police officers for private protection. I think he lost that bid, basically. Yeah. So he wasn't quite successful in being able to do that. But, Peter, where are you on it?
Well, there's a case still going on the court. We don't know the answer yet. Neither Labour nor Tories have said much about it, because by convention, politicians don't comment on royal matters, especially on security matters. To me, I'm not against paying for it in some form, because Harry and Meghan, they chose to opt out of being working royals, but they can't choose to opt out of the threat or concern against them. And we know that for anyone in the public eye, there are a very small number of disturbed individuals who could pose a threat to them. And Harry's part of the most famous family in the world. So I do have a bit of sympathy for him, because whatever choices he makes about his working life, it can't have much of an impact on a threat that might be posed by other people.
Yeah, but isn't that the purpose of private protection? Hire your own personal bodyguards. It doesn't necessarily have to be members of the police, and we've heard about that case a second ago, but staff yourself, surround yourself with personal bodyguards.
Yeah, well, I'd imagine that's very expensive. I think we'd all agree...
It's absolutely minted, Peter.
The police shouldn't be for hire, because you or I generally can't hire the police, and I think they have very, very strict policies on secondary working.
But the police are for hire, though. The police are for hire. When there's a football match, for example, police will be hired.
Well, that's not strictly true. They're not hired. Clubs pay a reimbursement cost. But I take your broader point, which is a Premier League club dips into its coffers.
The clubs are paying for advanced policing in and around those football games.
Yes, they're contributing to a bill.
By my simple definition, that would constitute... If you're a football club owner and you're staffing up your football match with the police and paying for that privilege, to me, that would indicate a level of the police being available for hire.
But legally, that's not the case, because it's a public event and the police have a duty to safeguard public events, and they seek reimbursement because, obviously, Premier League clubs tend to be very affluent.
Well, can I just come in
for
a brief
Jacqueline,
point? Brief point. I mean, they spend 99% of their time in California. One thing is for sure, you seem to get more crackpots running around America doing these sorts of things, that attacking people, etc. And obviously he has to pay for any protection there. So we're actually talking about a relatively few times that he may come over here, and because obviously we can't be expected to pay for his security over there. And but as I said, of course he needs security, but by the same token, I think he can pay for it.
What do you guys make to this at home? Because it is, to your point, it is a bit of a tricky one. You know, you can't help who your parents are, and if that does put you in the line of fire, so to speak, that's a crude expression, but if that does put you at higher risk, then is that your fault? The flip side to that is obviously he would monetise and does proactively monetise who he is and makes a lot of money from that. Anyway, what do you think to that situation? How much do you care about this topic? I've got to ask. I had to get it out the way, over and done with. That's what I say, because there's so many more important things I want to talk to you about. For example, the junior doctors will be going on strike again, a very long strike. I want to ask you whether or not you're still supporting them. I've got a Twitter poll running. Tell me on there as well whether or not you support them. Lots more too, so don't go anywhere, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, Baroness Foster, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Divided opinions coming in about Prince Harry. I can tell you now, I'm interested whether or not you think that we should be paying for his security. I'll tell you someone, Tony, he's been in touch saying, boring, boring, boring. Harry is a celebrity, not a royal. He needs to grow up and provide and pay for his own private security, not hire our police. No way. Well, I think he has still got his royal titles, hasn't he? That's what they were planning to take a bill through Parliament to try and get rid of them. And also, of course, he is very much still, in many people's eyes, a royal, isn't he? Leslie says, if the taxpayers-funded Harry would have armed police officers, if he provides his own protection in the UK, they would not be armed. Interesting. There you go. Keep your thoughts coming in on that. Look, there's a very serious topic that will affect many of us in this country. Hopefully, hardly any of us, because it's all about hospitals and who is going to get the care and what kind of care we're going to get if indeed we have to be in those places, because it makes me take a big, long sigh. But anyway, junior doctors, they have announced another strike. The next one will be the longest in NHS's history. Let's have a little look, shall we? Get the calendar up for those of you that are watching. So it's from the 7 a.m. On the 20th of December right through to the 22nd of December. And then again, the 3rd to the 8th of January. So, yes, they will be working some of those key dates over Christmas. But again, look at that. Many, many days they will not be working. This, of course, you'll be familiar by now with the fact that actually they've been requesting a 35% pay increase. They want pay restoration back until I think it's 2008. The latest offer that they got was an additional 3%, which they have now gone on to reject. Are you still supporting the junior doctors? I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But Jacqueline, are you?
No, I'm not, actually. I mean, and this is why we've had to sort of bring in these minimum service levels. I mean, I just find it astonishing as somebody who actually spent about 13 years negotiating pay and conditions in my former life, would ask for 35%. It was clearly never going to be... You're never going to be able to afford to do that for the NHS. And you're not going to be able to do it in the public sector. Most private sector pay rises would be nowhere near that. So I think it was unrealistic. I think it was amateurish. If the BMA were representing me, I think I'd want to change whoever the negotiators are. However, an offer has been made, and I think we'd all like the doctors in the NHS to get paid an awful lot more, but it is where it is. So you know, they're doing it with a sort of mantra, well, we're doing this for patient safety. Well, they're clearly not doing it for patient safety. We've got more than 7 million people actually on waiting lists. We're now going to be in a position, even after these earlier strikes, where that's going to be added to. So I cannot see where the safety of the patient comes in when you're actually making them leave even longer to have their operations or to be seen. So I'm just very, very unhappy about it. And in most countries around the world, and certainly across Europe, there are minimum service levels that are in, and therefore the patients at the time are then not affected.
Peter?
First of all, I want to explode the myth that it's somehow uncaring to go on strike. I've taken part in industrial action. That was when I was a newspaper... Hold on. I've taken part in industrial action when I was a newspaper reporter, and I didn't do that because I had antipathy to the readers. I did it because I cared about the product and I cared about the readers. And in something much more serious, like healthcare, it's just the same, even more so. Doctors are upset because they care about patients and they're concerned about the quality of care. Both sides also have to get to a deal because feelings have been inflamed on both sides. Doctors after 35%, they're not going to get that. As I understand it, no mainstream political party has come out in support of the 35% pay restoration, which covers several years. The grim reality is most of us are a bit poorer after COVID and the inflation crisis and the events of the last few years. I think the best thing the government can do, which they've blown very hot and cold on, is negotiate in good faith. The new Health Secretary, I think, is trying to do that and adopt more ameliorative language. Steve Barclay, her predecessor, started like that, but then ended up pointing the finger and calling them militant, which I don't think really helped come to an agreement.
But if they won't budge from 35%, if all they'll say is it's 35%, 35%, 35%, 35%, isn't that a little bit militant?
No, I think in all negotiations, you go in with a number and then you try and reach agreement. But I don't think having a starting position is in itself militant.
Do you think the 35% is a reasonable starting position?
Relative to the rest of society, that they're not going to get it, and I would take that down because I've never met anyone in the last year or so who's had a 35% pay increase.
Let me, before I bring Jacqueline in, because you say about being on strike, I mean, you know an awful lot about trade unionists, all the rest of it, but in Scotland, they've had a record 12.4% pay increase for junior doctors. This was together with a 4.5% that had been previously awarded, so you've got a 17.5% there. So why is it good enough in Scotland, those kind of figures, but not good enough in England?
Well, I don't know the fiscal position of the dissolved government in Holyrood, but if you've got a precedent of 12% and then in Scotland, then in England, you've got a demand for 35%, that would seem to kind of set the parameters for having a discussion. Because, again, the point is, having been on a strike, the goal is not to do that forever, making yourselves poorer and your service users, in this case patients, worse off as well. The goal always has to be to reach an agreement. Otherwise, if you're not seeking agreement, that would be militant. And I think both sides can reach agreement, but it does require negotiations in good faith.
Jacqueline, I mean, you know an awful lot about trade unionists. You were like what I would call a shop steward.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, he's saying about, these people are going on strike not to cause harm, but on the contrary, to provide an ongoing service to people because it will help them remain in their sector.
Well, look, the fact of the matter is, the BMA, unfortunately, has become militant. The BMA used to negotiate far better pay and conditions for their members a long time ago, and they were very well-respected trade union, actually, representing doctors. I think what you also need to do is separate out. People think that junior doctors are the doctors that are just starting, and I think it's the wrong terminology, I think, which they're looking at, because it's any doctor that, from when they're starting, they've graduated, they're going, starting work in a hospital, to the level where they then become a consultant. So that pay range is actually quite vast. What's also not mentioned, they're talking just about basic pay, and that's important, but equally, like we had in the airline industry, you will have payments for on-call. You get extra payments because you're working on social hours. We work over weekends, you work nights, you work all of these things. So you're then looking at the pay package, which the BMA never mentioned. You're also looking at the pensions that our doctors and our health service workers get, because the doctors aren't employed by the NHS. They are contracted to the NHS. They've never been employees. And so when you look at the overall package, including their pensions, etc., it's actually a good package. I'd like to give them more, but we have to cut our cloth. And I think they've made an offer. I think the grades are going up about 3,000, 32 to 37 at the lower end, from 43 to 63, and that's without all the add-ons. And I think a good negotiator, actually, good negotiators could have done something perhaps slightly differently and looked at where they are, maybe where the economy is in another 12 months' time.
By the way, that Twitter poll I mentioned, it has actually closed. Sorry about that, but the results have come in. So we were asking, do you support the junior doctors going on strike? Apparently, get this, everybody, 14.2% said they do support the strikes. and 85.8% said, no, you don't. You're divided on this at home. Leslie says, I totally support the strike and the junior doctors. 3% would be a pay cut. What on earth are the government thinking? You're saying the junior doctors must be eyeing up Australia, while simultaneously you suggest that overseas doctors with perhaps inferior training are eyeing up the UK. She says it's simple, pay our junior doctors more. That's 3%, by the way. It was an additional 3%. It wasn't just 3%. Paul, on the other hand, he's having none of it. He just says, sack the lot of them. Well, who would care for you then, Paul, when you went into the hospital? If you just sacked a load of people because you don't agree with their pay demands, what would you replace them with? Keith says, look, at the end of the day, they knew the rate of pay when they took the job. And I do think that is quite interesting.
They didn't know the rate of inflation, though. That's codswallop, I'm afraid.
We've had inflation for forever.
No, we haven't had inflation at 10% forever.
We have had high inflation when I started work. We've had huge levels of inflation and expensive mortgages and all sorts of things over my lifetime. Nobody wants high inflation, but we know what caused it as well.
It is unprecedented in the last 30 years to have inflation at 10%.
Yeah, we know that. So help me understand your thinking then, because the pay restoration goes back to 2008. So I think, Keith, I'll speak on your behalf if you don't mind. Keith, my viewer, what Keith is saying is that when they took the job, they knew that rate of pay. Now, most junior doctors, in fact, pretty much all of the junior doctors, none of them would have been there in 2008. So this cohort of junior doctors have joined post-2008. So I think what Keith is saying is the salary that they took on was the salary that they took on. So why would those people now be entitled to go all the way back to 2008 and have incremental pay backdated essentially at the levels of that? What's your recent 10% inflation got to do with that?
For two reasons. First of all, most of us in any walk of life, you don't have exactly the same role after 15 years. You tend to progress with one organisation or move to a different one.
Well, you're not a junior doctor after 15 years.
Well, we don't know that. But then
no, you do know that.
No, Jacqueline did describe it correctly.
It's
anyone below
8 and 20 years is these up to consultant level.
Well, I thought
so we've got very senior doctors, which are called junior doctors.
No, Jacqueline did set it out correctly. It's anyone below consultant level.
I thought it was you had 9 years of experience, and once you got into your 10th year, you were outside the parameters of being a junior doctor.
No, they still call them junior doctors. This is why I'm saying it's misleading in a way, because the public, you could sit there and you think, oh, it's people who've only been in for a few years, but it's actually people, doctors who've been practising, and then they get to a consultant level, then they move out of this what's called a junior doctor, being a junior doctor.
Well, that's the first point of call that I'd be starting with in these negotiations. I would want my job title to change.
Yeah.
If what you're saying is you can have 15 years of doctoral experience, 20 years.
Yeah.
I didn't realise you were still called a junior doctor. I thought the cut-off was about 9 years or something, and then you start branching out into your specialities or whatever you do. I would be starting there. I wouldn't want to be known as a junior doctor. So we've got to the bottom of that point.
May I answer your other point briefly? and I must apologise to Keith for being discourteous, Keith,
he don't mind.
And your viewers.
Keith's all right.
So, first of all, over the course of 15 years, one's role in any organisation, the media, a dustman, whatever, tends to change, or you change jobs. But secondly, none of us know what inflation will be like in 15 years' time. And I think in effect, it would have been for a quote-unquote junior doctor to sign on the dotted line, because at that point inflation was 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, only to find out inflation is 10 to 12%. So I think...
It's only been that level in the last couple of years.
Yeah, but we're all worse off. And I'll tell you, let me give you one stat, because I know you want to move on.
I don't want to move on. I want to try and get to the bottom of it. Inflation has only been...
You can't use inflation as a negotiating tool. We never know. I negotiated for years. We didn't know what the inflation rate was going to be in 5 years' time. You do a negotiation and you do it at the present time and you hope that it remains reasonable. Unfortunately for us, we had COVID, then we've had all the energy crises. So a variety of things have kicked in, which were not probably expected if we go back to 2018, for example. But we are where we are, which has been hugely costly. So it's not making an excuse, but it's just keeping it in proportion of when you're negotiating, you can only negotiate on what you think you can get. Good negotiating, what you can get, and looking at the climate as it is and hoping that the climate in the next few years will remain stable.
But I'm not sure I quite agree on that, because that's assuming everything is just a snapshot of today and you have no information about the future. Food is up 30%.
Now let's stick to the doctors, though.
Food Well, we all buy food. Doctors buy food.
He is on about that. He's on about the costs that are incurred by doctors.
Food prices are up 30%. And we know that inflation is not going to be... The Bank of England targets 2%. So we know it's not going to be that tomorrow. It's tracking down relatively slowly. So we know inflation is going to be what experts call an elevated rate for probably at least another 1 to 2 years. So that's where I part company with Jackie, because I think you do have to take into account the kind of economic forecast the next year or two, rather than just negotiate on the basis of today's information only.
Yeah, but what you've got to do as well, you've got to take into account this is the NHS in the public sector. Once you start giving more and more and more, say, for example, in this area, equally people are saying, but we need more money in the frontline services in terms of the treatment we receive and the equipment that they want and the latest, you know,
but this is less and less in real terms.
No. I mean, we've never spent as much as we have now on the National Health Service. I mean, in my view, as I've said for many years now, we need to look at how this works, because it's not working and it just seems to gobble up funds, and we seem to put sticking plasters over it. I personally, and I've said it for years, I've lived in 4 European countries, I would look at a mixed service whereby their insurance companies are involved, where there is a small element of that cake where people can't afford anything at all, because this is the only country that has this service. And it's a political football. Until people are prepared to sit down and look at it and say, let's take this out of politics and see how we're going to move this forward, I don't think we're going to see any improvements.
Sounds a bit close to privatisation.
By nature.
Privatisation by the back door, suggests Peter on that one. Ron says, give them 15%, but lock them into the NHS for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Christine says, I've worked in care all my life, but as a carer, our wages are low. But what you're saying is you're going into that profession because you care. You're suggesting that you wouldn't go on strike. John says, all well and good, you lot supporting junior doctors if you're fit and healthy. What about if you're perhaps not? Caroline says, junior doctors don't care about their patients. I think that's a bit harsh. I think they probably do. Are you a junior doctor watching this? What do you think? Tim says, I think this is absolutely shocking, them going on strike again. And Glenn says, Michelle, you are being naive. All of this is just bandwagon jumping and not wanting to be left out. That's why they're going on strike, because everyone else is. Oh, you're a harsh man, Glenn. Anyway, what's your thoughts on it all? Victoria Aitken, of course, the Health Secretary, she is saying in a statement, I've been clear that I respect the work of doctors in training and I want to work with them to settle that dispute. The junior doctors basically call off their strikes, will immediately look to get back round the table and continue the negotiations. Well, you know, there's another thing I want to talk to you about, which is our military personnel. Do you think we value them in this country? I want to talk to you about the state of some of the accommodation that they're expected to live in. Why? I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified on playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock. The Conservative Life here in the House of Lords. Baroness Foster is alongside me, as is the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Now, I want to talk to you about the state, the conditions under which we expect our military personnel, or lots of them, to live. So if I'm saying to you things like broken boilers, black mould, leaky roofs, etc., apparently that is a daily reality for 1 in 3 of our military personnel, and of course their families as well. Apparently they are in some of the lowest quality of defence accommodation that is available. Some of this accommodation apparently wouldn't even make the grade to be privately rented out. Do you think that we respect our military personnel, Jacqueline?
Well, I think we hugely respect our military personnel, but I think something's gone seriously wrong over the last years. I'm actually on the all-party political group, that's cross-party, for the armed forces. And obviously we've managed over the last couple of years to increase the budget for defence, etc. You know, but this has come to light more and more in the last few years. And I think I had a look at the numbers, and it's around 1/3 of personnel, and their accommodation is not up to scratch. It's not good enough, and I think what makes it even worse when the public hear things like that, we are spending millions a day homing illegal immigrants into this country and making sure that they're comfortable, quite rightly, but they're in 4-star hotels. They're in other accommodation, which is extremely good. Then there are complaints from some of them that they don't like the accommodation that they're in. And yet here we have, you know, members of the armed forces staying in accommodation with mould and various things like that. I know that there is now a push, because we do meet with heads of military, to get this sorted out. And all as I can say is, of course, they're all on budgets in the MOD. They need to be thoughtful about the way they spend the money as well. And this has to be a priority, because we haven't got an armed forces without the personnel that are there to serve the country and look after us.
Absolutely. Peter?
Well, we're evidently not showing sufficient respect if 25,000 members of the armed forces are in homes that are quote-unquote deficient. Then clearly, as a country, there's a shortfall, and I'm very surprised. Obviously, we all owe the army a great debt, and the families as well, because you might have a man or woman who's serving, but of course their families make other sacrifices as well. And let me give you one example. If you or I are renting, then subject to affordability, we can move. But, you know, I'd imagine it's a bit more difficult to just move house if you're an armed forces family. So I've got huge respect for the army, and I'm very sad, and I'm puzzled why it's got to this position, which seems endemic, 25,000.
Yeah, it is. I mean, apparently nearly 1,400 are living in houses that are in such poor condition they can't be charged rent under government rules. I mean, I find this just so shameful. And I've got to say as well, the Ministry of Defence, they've been speaking out about this. They're saying over the next decade, we're committed to spending more than £4 billion to make improvements to existing accommodation and build new living quarters for our service personnel. You touched on this, right, about the amount of money that people people, that we, the taxpayers, are spending in terms of putting people up on these 4-star hotels. I then remember things like the Bibi Stockholm, and people immediately start crying about the standards of the accommodation, saying it's not fit for these people that are crossing the channel, etc. Where are the people then? All these people that take to the streets crying about the so-called conditions that the asylum seekers would live under on the Bibi Stockholm, which I don't agree with them, by the way, but whatever. Where are those same people taken to the streets campaigning about the living standards for the army personnel, as an example?
Well, they don't. And the irony was that the Bibi Stockholm has been used for many years. Lots of contractors, obviously, that work at sea, work in ports, etc. It's been used as accommodation for them, and it was certainly good enough for them. And it was then upgraded to receive, actually, the illegal immigrants that were obviously put there, and there were all sorts of complaints about that. They are there now, I think. But no, you're quite right. Where is everybody protesting about our armed forces? They protest about everybody else.
Well, are you in the armed forces? Are you perhaps a veteran? What do you make to that story? Now, get this, everybody. Nearly 9 million Brits, apparently, are on antidepressants. What do you make to that? Is this just fine and normal? Are we perhaps over-medicalising emotions in this country, or is there something else going on? You tell me, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock alongside me, Baroness Foster and Peter Edwards-Remain. You guys have been getting in touch. We're just talking there about some of the standards of accommodation that we expect our military personnel to live in. Someone who was asked to remain anonymous says, I'm currently serving and living in army accommodation. He says the big problem is that basically the MOD have hired contractors to manage the estates, and you have to often wait months for repairs, even when it's urgent, he says. Also, you get charged stupid amounts of money for small damages when you leave. And he goes on to conclude he thinks that private companies are profiteering off military personnel. There's a lot of people coming through with similar stories. One of you here just explaining that you've lived... Mark says his son lived in military accommodation very recently. He didn't have reliable hot water or heating for 2 years. And he says that there were no funds to enable the repairs. Someone else here says, yes, we do indeed treat our military poorly because we think that they are people that are easy come, easy go. I think that's a very sad state of affairs, isn't it? Let me ask you about this. There's 8.6 million people in England, apparently, that are on antidepressants. Now, there's been an open letter written asking for fewer antidepressants to be prescribed, suggesting that we are perhaps over-medicalising problems and emotions. Jacqueline, where are you on it?
Well, I completely agree. I think the issue that we've got, and I've mentioned it before, is that the National Health Service, rather than being preventative, tends to be reactionary. I was very close to somebody who did have a serious mental health issue and had to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
Right.
And there's a real differentiation between serious mental health issues and then others, which I think could be treated in a very different way, because we're not talking about everybody with schizophrenia here. A lot of this is to do with lifestyle. You know, sometimes we all get fed up, and then I remember when we were little and we were told to sort of shake out of it. It's not easy for everybody. But lifestyle, I think, is one of the main things. I think people get very depressed if they're not working, and they're the sort of people that like to work, particularly if they lose their job. People get very depressed and very unwell if they lose their circle of friends. So I think there are a variety of things, and then we have to look at how can we deal with those sorts of things and get people back up and running. So I think that the medical profession can, at times, it's not all of them, but too often they are basically trying to, again, stick that sticking plaster over it instead of sorting out the cause of what is wrong with that patient. Why does that patient want these antidepressants? Because some will definitely need them, and dealing with the core issue rather than just doling out medication, which I think is completely the wrong thing to do.
Peter?
Well, I think Jacqueline's answer underlined the complexities, really, of trying to solve something that's so worrying and so saddening, because, yeah, many of us do have friends who've had mild or severe mental illnesses, and we know they're all individuals that need individual treatment rather than a one-size-fits-all answer. But perhaps where I disagree, again, is this thing about lifestyle, because depression can be caused by what doctors call situational events, bereavement, losing a job, perhaps two obvious ones, but it can also be caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. So...
Well, let me explore that. So if you have a bereavement, if your mum dies, well, you're going to be in a... I mean, if you care about your mum, you're going to be in a state. That's not an illness, is it? That's a normal, natural, emotional human reaction. I'm not saying it's a pleasant reaction. I'm not wishing it on anybody, on the contrary. But...
Grief, yeah,
illness, is it?
But sadly, so we'll all experience grief in our lifetime because we'll all lose someone we care about. But also, for some people, that can last a lifetime, and grief can become something medical. Now, we know we're all going to have bereavements, and that will probably be the worst moment in our life, but these crises that we do have, bereavement and unemployment, and sometimes things like housing or relationship failure, they can be triggers as well. So that's why I didn't use the word grief, because I think it's a very different thing. The other point I'll make briefly from this story, which is it's asking a lot of questions, and, you know, the people that wrote it are very serious, former chief executive of the NHS, some doctors, so they're not lay people, and I'm a lay person, so try and speak with humility. But we don't know, is there more depression, or is there more diagnosis of it, or is there more inaccurate prescribing? Now, I don't think we can know the answer to that.
I think there's an issue, though, with the elderly and older people. And you see it in care homes sometimes, and you see it generally. And quite often people get anxious and they are obviously given antidepressants, and it's probably not antidepressants that they need.
Well, yeah, I mean, anxiety is a different type of disorder,
Yeah,
isn't it?
but if they're given antidepressants for it, that's the problem.
One of the things I think is our nation's shame, actually, is all of the waiting lists to access mental health and counselling and all the rest of it, especially as well when you think about, is it CAMS, the children's services? If any of you have got kids or grandkids that are struggling, sometimes, you know, it's not medication they need, it's actually time and space to work through challenges and all the rest of it. Many of you, well, one of you has just said to me as well, a point that I think is interesting. You're saying that people used to overprescribe antibiotics for all ailments. You're asking have as antidepressants basically become the new antibiotic. Who's this? Hazel says, I needed them after COVID and all the rest of it. But she says, I've come to terms with what was causing my depression personally, and I will soon hopefully be coming off them, says Hazel. Well, I wish you all the very best. And anyone that is suffering, don't suffer in silence. There's no shame in not being well, and there's no shame in needing help and asking for help. There's a great strength about it, if you ask me. Anyway, Peter, thank you for your company this evening. Jacqueline, for yours too. Thank you at home. Don't go anywhere. Up next, Richard Tyson and Night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It'll be a colder night tonight than last night because much of the country will be under clear spells. That's because the rain many of us have seen through today, brought by this low pressure, is pushing off to the east, and behind it we've got a bit more of a settled interlude, at least that will last at least through Wednesday. So plenty of clear spells out there this evening and a frost developing quite quickly, so temperatures will drop off quite quickly tonight. There's an ice warning in force across eastern areas of Scotland. We'll see some mist and fog developing across parts of Wales and the southwest of England, and it will be widely a frosty start to the day tomorrow. But there will be some sunshine around, particularly across northern areas and eastern areas where the sunshine should last for much of the day. Further west, though, the sunshine will turn hazier throughout the day once any mist and fog clears, and you can see across parts of Northern Ireland there will be rain arriving by lunchtime. That rain will push into parts of Wales as well as Cornwall by the end of the day as well. Temperatures will start to rise, though, in the west with more of a southwesterly breeze. In the east, however, still feeling quite chilly with only highs of around 3 or 4 degrees. And then Thursday is going to be a widely more wet day. There are warnings in force for heavy rain across many western areas as well as parts of Scotland too. There could be some difficult driving conditions because of the rain, and the rain will last through the rest of the week, Friday and into the weekend, but temperatures will start to rise into double figures. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories